Hi, I'm Katie Keech. I am an LMFT and I also have lived experience with dissociative identities and ADHD. And I'm wearing a black shirt with a little bit of a green kitty and,
Oh,
and a silver necklace. I have a sort of dark gray hair that's tied back. And I am excited to be on this panel because I don't think we've ever had a panel where we've had a bunch of folks who are working in mental health in different capacities who also have lived experiences speaking about how we're talked about by folks who study dissociative identities or plurality. And I really was excited to see what everybody would have to say to just discuss this topic together. End there and I'm going to pass it to Melissa Barsotti.
Hey there, my name is Melissa Barsotti, and I'm an LCSW. I'm a Mexican American female with brown skin, and currently I'm wearing a green shirt and hair's in a bun and got some big glasses on. And it's an honor to be on this panel. Everyone here is so amazing and has done so much written books and just really advocated for our community. I'm new to the community. It just in the last 5 years, looking back to the last 15 years that I've been in therapy, that the realities that I do have a system and just learning as I go along, and happy to be here, with my lived experience, my cultural experience, and yeah, just looking forward to changing the way that plurality is looked at by professionals and treated.
And Michelle Kahl.
Hi all, my name is Michelle Kahl, and I have blonde hair and I have glasses on currently, button-down shirt with pastel colors, white, pink and blue, a little bit of yellow in there. I'm a therapist and have been in this field for about 30 years, and even though I have all of that, I am only new to my system for about the last year. Although now that I look back on everything, it all makes sense. So just super, super happy to be here and looking forward to offering what I can and listening to all of my friends here and hoping to have some type of positive benefit that we can give the world for healing.
And Dr. Jamie Marich.
Hi, everyone. We're Dr. Jamie Marich. Professionally, we're the author of Dissociation Made Simple and a longtime EMDR trainer and professional clinical counselor. Personally, we are the Unicorn System, which is the name that was revealed to us just this past year. We also use stylized as Jamie Plus sometimes. And we are a fuller figured woman with a bit of a chubby face. We have highlighted blonde hair, blue eyes, fair skin. We're wearing rainbow earrings, a hot pink top, and a shawl that is aqua and purple. And we're sitting in our office near Akron, Ohio, which is on Erie Nation land. And this is our office where there's a bookshelf behind us with all kinds of tchotchkes and figurines and things that mean a lot to us in our system. Thanks, Katie, for having us. I look forward to the discussion.
And Crystals.
Hi, I'm Crystals. Sometimes I use my last name Lockman, or sometimes I use the name Multifaceted in the community. I am trained as a clinician, but took a turn and started Multifaceted Journeys, where I work from my lived experience, doing groups and consultations for therapists. And what else? Oh, image description. I have a light skin, brownish blonde hair, and I'm wearing a kind of interesting patterned blue and greenish shirt, and I have some flowers in the background. And I'm excited to be on this panel. I think it's an important subject that can be a little bit divisive in various communities. So I think it's nice that we're all coming together and talking about it. And thank you for having me.
And Dr. Adrian Fletcher.
Hi, I'm Dr. Adrian Fletcher, but known by the DID community as the Adrian and Co system. I am trained as a clinical psychologist. I've worked in mental health for over 23 years. I stopped my private practice in December of 2023 just to focus more on speaking and advocacy and education. I started a new business last year called Altercology, kind of merging the idea that psychology can be different and also use the term alters just because that's what my parts came up with. So we're still in the process of to building Altercology, but we offer mentorship programs, and we're also the authors of One Soul, Multiple Expressions, which is a little poetry book put out by my parts. And we're working on a book for New Harbinger Publications, an experiential toolbox for people living with dissociation and DID to be able to help their parts, their system, and their parts at home. And hopefully that will be published in 2025. I'm really excited to be here. It's been really hard to be inside the field of mental health. I feel like I'm a disruptor, and it just wasn't serving my soul in the same way. So I still like to serve the mental health community, but in a way that makes more sense for me and my parts now. And I'm really excited to be here amongst all of you and just to have a heartfelt, authentic discussion of what both worlds have been like clinically and from the lived experience standpoint. I feel like I've learned more about lived experience by spending more time in the community versus any time I've ever spent in mental health. Thank you for having me and asking me to be a part of the panel too.
Thanks for being a part. No pun intended, sorry. Melissa Parker.
We're the Melissas. We are in Arlington, Massachusetts, the traditional unceded land of the Massachusetts people. We are LMHC psychotherapists, or therapy, as we call ourselves, the plural of therapist. We are, let's see, we have brown hair that has pink streaks in it, and we have light skin with freckles and glasses. And we're wearing a blue shirt, and we are sitting in our kind of messy therapy office. And we're just really happy to be here and be in conversation with everybody. And we're here to share what we know and to learn what other people know. So very happy to be here. Thank you.
Thanks. And Dr. Anna Rosenhauer.
Hi, I'm Anna Rosenhauer. I'm a postdoctoral researcher. My background is in psychology and neuroscience, and I'm currently a postdoc in the psychiatry and behavioral neurosciences department. And I study how the brain responds to trauma and stress and PTSD, and how that impacts future behavior, particularly, as well as future generations. And I'm really excited to bring both my professional and lived experience to the panel. I am pale-skinned with light brown hair that's curly and short, just above the shoulders. And I have a dark gray sweater with little silver specks on it. And I have a silver double ring necklace on, and I am in front of a white curtain in a big black chair in my home.
Do you mind if I say something real quick?
Oh, go for it.
Y'all might see me kind of yawning or struggling with my breath a lot, and that sadly, unfortunately happens with the social anxiety that I tend to have, but I'm okay, and I'm not tired, and I'm not bored, and I'm attentive.
I'm going to throw a different thing in. This is Katie. In terms of this sort of thing leading to plurality or multiplicity, because there are some complications, I think, that the clinical world hasn't necessarily addressed in research and in literature, and they've tossed it out and they've acknowledged it, but then it's never really been talked about. It's this weird thing. And I've been scratching my head over it. In the Lowenstein and Brand paper recently that did talk about specifically that this is like mostly torture leads to da-da-da-da. It also said that sometimes kids who are children of folks who have DID will have DID. And then in other literature, it sort of talks about generational transmission through what's called, and I think this is very vague, so I've been really drilling down onto this because it's so vague, like it seems so confusing. It's high hypnotizability. And if you've ever studied hypnosis, as I have, like that doesn't actually make any sense because hypnosis is in everything you do. It's not an on-off thing. It's not like, oh, you count down and now you're hypnotized. Like any waking state could potentially be hypnotic, right? So that is actually a meaningless concept in a lot of ways. And I've been looking, at different things biologically, that people who are autistic have higher levels of what's called DMT, which endogenous DMT from the pineal gland, and also make more bufotenine, which is those are both things you can get in nature that are psychoactive or hallucinogens, but happen in the brain naturally. And And there was a research that showed people who have schizophrenia have higher levels of DMT too. But my question was, do they understand the difference between people who have schizophrenia and people who have plurality, and what were they looking at, and how clean was that research? So I've also worked with people, and I have known people who have had very early ongoing and denial related abuse that should have resulted in, according to clinical models, in multiplicity, and they absolutely do not have it. So there is some other component that's being ignored that isn't studied that factors into why some people are plural and some people are not.
Yeah, I think that it's a really interesting paradigm shift if we think about looking at research from a neurodivergent standpoint. Because research has really ignored this possibility that brains have certain tendencies or tendencies to wire in a certain way, tendencies to react in a certain way, groupings of responses that are more likely to happen in certain individuals than other individuals. And I think that especially when it comes to things like autism and schizophrenia and plurality, that getting so stuck on this deficit view of and this disordered view has really limited the research from taking a more broader look at what might be going on under the surface. And that once you have a very limiting viewpoint, everything tends to flow out of that. And so you end up with very limited research findings that all seem to point to that viewpoint. Because if you're using that viewpoint to design the research, it will very likely confirm your viewpoint, which we all know happens. And yet we tend to ignore in a lot of areas of research, particularly psychological research. I always laugh because my graduate advisor used to always tell us how circular psychological research was. And she was like, hey guys, you know that how we define something as being anxiety is like if we're working in an animal model, we say it's an anxiety-like behavior if we give them an anxiolytic and it goes away. So if you give an anti-anxiety medication and it goes away, we classify it as anxiety-like. However, in the same model, if you are trying to discover if a drug is an anxiolytic, is it anti-anxiety? What do? You produce an anxiety-like behavior and then see if the drug takes it away. And if it does, then it's an anxiolytic. So these are the kind of circular patterns that we have in research, and that sometimes we need to, especially as researchers, take a step back and look at the bigger picture of like, okay, what else could be going on that's outside my viewpoint and that's outside my theories that might better explain the information that's coming in now.
Hey everyone, this is Jamie. So since we're talking viewpoints, I have to emphasize there's a whole breadth and depth and canon of knowledge out there outside of Western psychology. And even as this conversation is got up, I'm thinking of Julian, who is the shaman that I interviewed, the Ecuadorian shaman in Dissociation Made Simple. And he said something so impactful to me during that interview, which is all this talk about the brain in modern psychology would make my elder kind of chuckle, because the brain is not even a construct in traditional shamanism. That we see things through story, through mythology, how we feel them, how we sense them. And there's a lot out there you can read on this. I tried to start this conversation in Dissociation Made Simple about how behaviors and responses that Western psychology can describe as problematically dissociative are seen as spiritual gifts in so many other cultures. And your healers and your shamans are the ones in so many cultures that tend to be very attuned to their parts and are comfortable and competent working in that poetry. So if we're talking viewpoints, we really, really have to look at this whole, is dissociation pathology? really even part of a discussion of Western psychology and psychiatry. So just toss out that.
Are we allowed to be like humorous on this panel? I was just going to say, first of all, McLean Hospital would really benefit from your expertise, Anna. I feel like if you want to change the wave of research, that might be a good place to start writing letters to Kaufman and Robinson. So I had that thought. And the other thought was, I was like, thank you all for validating my identity crisis as Dr. Fletcher, and that I look forward to doing more spiritual stuff on the healing journey, just because it's so I was just thinking about Dr. Jamie, as you were talking about, like, I have this love for card pulls and how, like, intuitively, like, I genuinely believe these things, and how much healing the crystals have brought to my life, and just meditation and mindfulness and different aspects of that, right? And how I wasn't able to even do most of that stuff early on in my healing. So I think are missing that's why, I mean, that's one of the reasons why I left formal mental health. It just doesn't feel like it fits. It's very diagnostic, it's very check the box, it's very like, here's an organized treatment plan. And for any human, I don't even think that makes sense, let alone the complications of DID, and how it doesn't, there are a lot of things I think we're made to feel are complicated about our own diagnosis that may actually not be complicated at all. It's just a different way of living, right? It's that whole concept of doing it differently. But if we are doing it differently, we're talking about doing it differently, and we don't fit the boxes, whatever it is, societal boxes or Western medicine, then we're somehow dysfunctional, pathological, not functioning well, when I actually think it's quite the opposite. It's the framework that still exists. Anyway, didn't mean to get on a little soapbox, but my mind, I couldn't find the emoji that's like, just listening to you all talk. That's what my mind feels like it's doing. It's just expanding. So thank you for just, I don't know, it just feels really easy to have this conversation. And I don't know that it's always felt like that, even inside mental health when we're at conferences and things.
Yeah, this is Katie again. I was just trying to look into different cultures and see what different cultures thought about plurality, and it was kind of fascinating. I've had some conversations with Arden Lay, who's been talking with people who have been going to, yeah, Jamie knows it, people who have been working with more indigenous knowledge in Poland. I think it's Poland. Is that right?
Arden has a great understanding of all of Eastern European Slavic mythology, what's been, yeah.
Yeah, and there are concepts of passed down plurality. Some of them, I think one of them is called a strigoi, which is, I don't want to quite go into it, but I've also been looking at Nigeria has a concept of spiritual plurality, where sometimes the person's born and the door is left open, and sometimes the door is closed. And when the door is left open, that sort of creates a construct for plurality. And just looking at different ways it's looked at as a spiritual thing and not specifically a traumatic thing is, I think, needed in terms of the larger viewpoint. And we are not incorporating that.
Yeah, this is Anna again. Just to stand up for my profession just a little, it's really important that we have like this research in the Western model. Like, it's great. It does a really good job at what it was designed to do. It just does a really poor job at what it wasn't designed to do. And yet here we are a lot of the time taking what it does and applying it to things it was never made to apply to in the first place. Because we live in a Western society that so minimizes other ways of collecting knowledge, other ways of collecting experiences, and other ways of measuring and comparing that aren't quantitative, categorical, deductive, inductive, but are more intuitive or spiritual, or those sorts of things that we don't necessarily have the science language for yet. So, like, is it important that we're able to categorize trauma? Yes. And actually, I straddle like an interesting contradiction, because on the one side of things, I spend my time in the lab literally dividing groups of people by the type of trauma that they have. Could we get any more hierarchical and rankist than that? However, what that allows me to then do is to look overarchingly and aggregate the data to kind of come along and provide some information about norms, because that's what it's doing. It's providing information about norms. for this population who's experienced this type of thing, a norm outcome is this. However, you have to remember that that's all it's giving us. All it's giving us is information about norms and the sample that it was taken from. So it's important to be like, okay, here, yeah, this is great information. Love it. My heart loves it. Love doing it. However, it's not the full picture, and we need other ways of looking at things in order to see the full picture. And what happens again a lot of the time is we get defensive and we get in our always, only, ever mindset, and we're like, oh, but this is how it is. This is always how it is. This is only how it is. This is ever how it is. And I think that science in general right now is coming to a little bit of a crisis point as far as recognizing the importance of lived experience voices, maybe, of recognizing, the importance of other means of collecting information and knowledge, of recognizing that just maybe perhaps the Western medical model has some failings. You said we were allowed to be funny, right? That's funny.
See, I'm wondering if we have anything more to say on this topic or if we should move on to the next topic. I was also thinking as you were talking, Anna, about the research around trauma appearing in the skin, which I just found fascinating, that I think you are working with your colleague on. That was very, very interesting. I'm curious to hear more about that when you get some more information. But we are moving on to, have you felt that the clinical literature and establishment training on complex DID has had a tendency to create a hierarchy out of traumatic impacts? I think this might be a little bit redundant for stuff that we've already been talking about. So we might have maybe a little to say on it, or we might feel like we want to move on from this. I'll just leave it for folks.
This is Michelle. I think just to add on to that, what Anna was saying really, I think has a lot of legitimacy. I don't discount Western medicine. I don't discount any research. I think that is all important. And we need to incorporate people's understanding based on their culture and on their spirituality and on the things that make them, what are their essences? What makes them up? What makes them who they are? That's how we can get a better understanding. I don't know necessarily it's about hierarchy. It's more about taking the whole person. And this is what I do with my clients. I cannot pretend to understand where they're coming from. I might know what my own experiences have been like, and yet I won't ever get to understand what their experience is like unless I ask, unless we have really in-depth conversations and I get to understand what makes them, what makes them unique. And I think that's where it's about building a bridge between this medical model disease approach. I don't like using that word, but we need to start somewhere and bring in lived experience so that these things can be bridged together, and all of that makes sense and all of that help people.
I just want to highlight Dr. Marich's book, Dissociation Made Simple. I loved your qualitative approach, and I feel it would be great to have minds like yours and, academic minds embrace that mindset, that curiosity. I think that's one of the things that bothers me the most in our field is a lack of humility that clinicians can have. And then worse, when you're in structures or institutions, the groupthink that happens. There needs to be more questions posed the way that you have in your beautiful book, Dr. Jamie. It's one of I just looking forward to more works like that. Thank you.
Well, this is Dr. Jamie or Jamie. And one of the comments I'll make on that is, I am a pretty finitely trained qualitative researcher. I'm considered like the most significant qualitative researcher in EMDR therapy. And even with that and my pride in being a phenomenologist, I have been met with so much, oh, that's cute. You do qualitative research. And it's that our field, if we're talking about the clinical professions, doesn't value it. So I don't really spend a lot of my time doing it. And I'm grateful I was able to do it in Dissociation Made Simple in a very human way that was book publishable. but perhaps not peer-reviewed literature publishable. But I think until we change as a field our mindset about what we consider valid knowledge. I mean, there's a term I think we all need to know, which is called epistemicide, which is the killing of sources of knowledge. And it serves the Western patriarchal academic model to only elevate one type of knowledge, is very much how we feel. And that's why we ran away from academics years ago. We just felt like our minds were never safe there. And talking about identity crisis, I mean, we go back and forth all the time on what we want to be when we grow up. Do we hang out in the field and keep trying to have conversations like this? Do we show the field there's another way to do healing that maybe is not so new? We don't know. And we're open to keep finding out. And I know several of you have said this already, having conversations like this today and making them available to the public to listen in on is a valid form of knowledge. And I hope people can take that and embrace it.
Yeah, I was just thinking about there really still is such a hierarchy that exists within the global field of mental health, and it really is just heartbreaking. I mean, we still know that it's usually, this is what I was taught when I was in graduate school: psychiatrists, psychologists, social workers, licensed marriage and family therapists, counselors, alcohol and drug counselor. Like that's how, like, it was like a level of respect. It was disgusting. And I'm still seeing a lot of that ego inside clinical mental health. I was saying to Melissa's when we talked about her research that she's going to be doing, or they're going to be doing, we we're just kind of talking about how overall, like, the research could be absolutely incredible if they would invite us to participate in lived experience. We have, all of us, our unique systems have so much to offer. Like, if they want to do a Western medicine model, like, there's so much information they could gather. It's mind blowing to me how they still don't continue. Some of the establishments won't come to the table to really hear us, because I think that is the bridge. I do think a lot of us are showing what can be done for healing and different types of research outside and away of the medical model. Then I also see a lot of people willing to participate in continuing to build that bridge. So I think the hierarchy needs to continue to come down. A lot of that has nothing to do with us and more to do with just that overall societal way of being. And I think as more and more of us step out and do our different projects or different things that we're doing, we are going to show that it's not just that way. And in fact, that way has some pretty strong limitations. And then only then can there be a ripple effect of other people witnessing, how much change can happen outside of that. But man, I'm not even a researcher. I have a hard time understanding statistics, but I just think about all of the unique experiences systems have. And if that were put into some type of healthy way of doing research, the information we could gather to help people all around the world would be incredible. So yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunity for that. And I'm just really proud of all of us for continuing to be on our missions, despite the fact that it's hard to get the establishments to listen to help improve treatment for a lot of people.
I mean, speaking to the power of qualitative research and the impacts, there was a phenomenal study, and I can't remember the researchers, and I apologize for that, in the autism community that I would love to have replicated in DID clinical work. Anna, you know about it. It was led by autistic researchers, because it's been really hard to get autistic researchers on panels for autism research, which has changed how it's been looked at immensely. But what they did was they were studying bias among the researchers who are studying autism, and they couldn't do a strict, ABCD answers, because then they know they would game that and pick the most favorable one, so that they wouldn't look like they're biased against folks who are autistic. So they had them write out answers, and it was very painstaking to write out all the answers, and that was very painstaking to read all of the answers. And it was actually some of the responses from some of the researchers reading it, it was very painful and devastating to see the amount of bias against autistic people that all these researchers had and disclosed. They did find that the teams that had the least amount of bias against autism were ones that had autistic researchers on the team, and the ones that had the most bias were the ones that had none. And I think that is probably true for dissociation and DID. And I think that's partly why we don't have any invitation currently to look and source for folks who have dissociative identities to be on research teams or treatment teams, and that people have been specifically excluded, although that's denied, but that was, denied in the autism studies as well. People want to look good. People want to not say that they're biased when they in fact are, or may not even be aware of their biases. And that's a huge part of our field.
Yeah, I actually look towards the autistic community as they're, gaining ground as far as research goes, of having individuals with lived experience who are participating in and ideally leading the research. And I always tell my little freshman in Psych 101 is like, okay, who's the best people to do autism research? And I'm like, and they're like, autistics. Duh. Like they know it intuitively that like the people who have the best view are those who have the experience. Now, are there things that you can learn from an outside view? Absolutely. I feel like we've covered that pretty well in the past, like 100 years. So I feel like we should be good for a while. But I am looking to them and I am feeling hopeful as I'm seeing some really brave individuals own their autistic identity and put that out there, not just in their lives and their professional lives, but into the actual literature. And there has been some movement to recommend that researchers, as they're publishing, identify some of the biases that they come from so that it better enables people to really understand where the research might be limited or where it might be specifically advantaged by having specific individuals who are involved. And I look forward to the dissociative identities community and the plural community really beginning to make headway in that way. And I do see it happening. And I do see that the younger generations that are coming up, even through academia, are a lot more aware and understanding and conscious of these kinds of issues. And they tend to have a lot more humility than some of those who are more expert in the field. And I feel that by building these bridges early, that I think that there's going to be headway made soon. At least when I'm not feeling all disillusioned and cynical, that's what I think.
Just to piggyback real quick on communities, the OCD community is pretty phenomenal as well in the way that they collaborate with individuals with lived experience, and it's just another highlight of how ostracized. What is it about dissociation that is so scary that this can't take place, or this in 2024 this isn't happening.
This is Jamie.
And
I just have to say one more thing about research, because I could go on so many soapboxes about this, and I know we have to finish up with a few more questions. To give some credit to the academic establishment, of which I've run from, it was late last year, there was an article in the European Journal of Trauma and Dissociation called "It's Just a Body" about trans experiences in mental health, and it was the first. It was touted as the first known time that a system name actually appeared on a paper. So that's optimistic. And what Anna is sharing is very much optimistic. But where we still feel very disillusioned is that it is not really viable for those of us who don't work in academic establishments to do research, because for so many reasons that I've written about, and biases that I've encountered, not as a plural even, but as a qualitative researcher in a very quantitatively driven word. Again, this kind of knowledge isn't valued. So I will throw this out for possible more controversy. But especially as a qualitative researcher with some background in ethnography as a way to do research, friends, what is happening on social media as social art is where I'm seeing a lot of what's up in not just our community, but in a lot of communities, especially folks with neurodivergence. And I know we have this divide. I mean, this was what so much of the McLean controversy was about last year, of like, oh, research is up here, the academy is up here, and what these kids are doing on TikTok is not relevant. Bullshit. Yeah, just I would love to have the time to do content analysis of what is shown on social media, because I think that is what is a more accurate temperature take of what can be happening in systems and cultures. We're going to cut ourselves off or we'll keep going.
Anna here, real quick. I think that like one of the problems we have specifically with plurality and DID and quite possibly some other what we consider mental disorders is a problem that we've kind of been branded as being unreliable narrators of our own narrative, of our own unreliable narrators of our own experience. And this is a really, if you think about it, a really convenient way to maintain power. Because if you say that someone like can't, understand their own experience or can't narrate that experience or put it into words or communication, then it disempowers them completely. And I think that's part of the problem that we have, and that part of why panels like this and the Plural Association and other things, individuals like these very brave individuals and systems who are being more public about their plurality and their identities that are marginalized, is that we begin to be taking back that voice. And power never gives up power freely. Like that's never occurred as far as I can tell. And so it's not an easy fight, and there's a lot of pushback and there's a lot of defensiveness. But as we begin to own our own narratives, I believe there's a realness and an authenticity to that will be proving ourselves to those who don't understand and don't know. And I think that people who don't have the information yet are automatically drawn to those authentic voices, and that we can hope that that becomes the norm, and that eventually those in power will also, or those who are humble enough to begin to listen to those voices and that authenticity, and that change will occur.
I don't know if this is well, I'm just gonna say it. I think a lot of the reason why they're as disconnected as they are for the reasons they are, because they actually are scared of us, but not for the reasons that maybe mainstream media thinks people should be scared of us. I think they are like seriously intimidated by, the dissociative minds and what we all bring to the table. And I don't, if that's arrogant to say, then somebody can classify me in that little checkbox. It doesn't make any sense. You have, and there's that saying, like, I think they used to say it when people would sign up for therapy. Like, if you're going to work with a dissociative client, you better be smart and you better be bright, because we kind of are outsmart you. And it's not because we are egotistical, but because our brains had to do what it needed to do to survive. So obviously we have some skill sets that others don't have. But I do think a lot of the time the establishments are intimidated by us and what we're going to uncover, because we're going to prove a lot of their stuff wrong, even though that's not necessarily what we're intending to do. I don't know. I had a soapbox moment. Forgive me. Every
But
once
it's
in a while I hear something and I'm just like, this just needs to be said. But
And that's one of the hard things is Melissa's again. I think one thing we've noticed kind of becoming a bit of a trend is this false dichotomy, is these folks who have just learned experience saying, well, these lived experience people are saying that they know better and they can do better, and kind of creating this divide that we're not really creating. I think what I hear a lot of us saying is that we have this knowledge of our experiences of hearing other people tell their stories in really frank ways that maybe you don't get in the mainstream. And we're just trying to bring something to the table that's not even so much to our benefit, but that's going to benefit other people like us. And I think there's a lot of fear, Adrian, just like what you all were saying about, what is this going to uncover? What is this going to disprove? Are we going to debunk a whole bunch of theories? And we honestly think, yeah, we are. I mean, even just by having these conversations, there's a lot of things that we're talking about that don't necessarily benefit the establishment theories about us, but are very true. And this isn't an attack. It's not even a reproach. It's just reality. And it makes us wonder, why are people in this field dedicating their work, their professional lives to working with people like us if they can't bear us as colleagues if they can't bear our voices and our truths? What's going on here?
I can say a little something on this, although I'm not sure it's directly answering the question, which is that kind of to what Melissa was saying about like there's not a hierarchy, but different forms of knowledge and different experiences, and also the discounting of somebody with lived experience who lives with it all day, every day, and then also is in the community. Because I've seen and heard about clinicians who will have one client with DID and create a whole theory around their work with that one client. And I'm like, I talk to people who are plural, groups of people who are plural all day, every day, and listen to all the podcasts and read all the stuff. And in the community, like, you're not going to get that sitting for an hour with a client in a therapy setting when you're not seeing them in any other setting, because people present, even singlets present completely differently in different settings. And it's not about, and also this is not to the question, but I also just feel like it's important to say that different people want different experiences in their therapists. Some people want a therapist that doesn't have lived experience because of the differences, and that's fine. And some people want therapists that do, and it's not that one is better necessarily, it's that they're different. That might be another question, so I'll stop talking now.
No, it's fine. I think I spoke to something when I had stated in it somewhere where I had one to only work with people who had lived experience, because I had been working with people who didn't have lived experience for over 20 years and basically was in what's called phase 1 therapy for 20 years, which was fine, but like it didn't help me to know my system. It just, I was regulated, and I was kind of getting frustrated with teaching different singlet therapists about plurality, and working more recently with plural therapists has been a complete game changer for my work. And that's partially why, I wanted to bring people together for the Refractory with people with lived experience who are working with mental health, because we don't know what we know unless we start bouncing it off of each other and comparing notes, and figuring out what we want to do with that. And that's the first step, and finding out, how much we have a common shared plural language we use with our clients, and how, when I first experienced that with a plural therapist, was so deeply affirming. I think I cried after that session, as I had never experienced that before. I had never been recognized and seen so deeply. It meant so much to have that witnessing, and to have the language to understand just very fluidly about different selves and different self states, and checking on different things when I'm struggling, like not as because a lot of the singlet therapists can't think of the person in front of them, even if they know they're plural, they don't think of them as a plural system, and don't check automatically on what's happening with the whole system and how it's interweaving and how it's breathing together. Having somebody track those things in the therapy, I think we are potentially a threat, because we do have these skill sets, and I don't think that they do.
Correct. This is Jamie. I could say that pretty confidently from knowing both sides of this story. And a lot of what I have advocated since the beginning is there can be this intimidation by us, because I think being plural actually helps us to be better. Doesn't automatically make us better therapists, because we do have to have a willingness to do our own work, which is what I think is lacking in a lot of the trauma community in general, is a misunderstanding of our own path, our own relationship to dissociation, our own internal world and system of parts. And it's just so easy for people to say, Katie and I've used this language before, oh, the poor dears. I just want to help people. And yeah, we're going to get on a higher soapbox, so we'll tap out, because I'm sure there's more questions we want to get to.
Yeah, I'm going to hit the next question, and I might cut some questions out, but I think this kind of conversation is particularly important, so I haven't been rigid around direction.
Also, I have groundbreaking information that one of my littles wants you all to know, because she's been ruminating on this, that going back to the crayon box analogy, macaroni and cheese is a legitimate Crayola crayon color, and everyone needs to know about it. Sorry, had to tell you.
That's what I'm making for lunch after this, based on that. So thank you to whoever put that out there in your world.
It's very important, and it makes all the sense in the world. How have you found self-acceptance and plurality? It's question 4, and then I'll.
Well, we can go. This is Crystal's. I think the self-acceptance around it has really come from being in community with other people who are plural. And it's taken time, and I think there's still times where it's hard. But I think that the main thing is, and not just a group here or there, but like that at this point, probably within the last year, like a lot of my closest friends are plural. And a lot of the people that I spend the most time with are plural. At this point, almost everybody in my life knows that I'm plural. I'm out as it. I changed my name from Crystal. I added the S to the end of it. So, and everybody's like, oh, your name's Crystal. And I'm like, well, it has an S on the end. And they're like, oh, so it's plural. And I'm like, I kind of have a choice point. Do I come out or not? Even just like that most of the time I don't, but sometimes I do. And just kind of the normalizing of it, of like, this is just who I am and how I am and who we are, and getting more comfortable around interchanging pronouns, telling people I change my pronouns back and forth. I don't always use I don't always use we. It doesn't necessarily mean anything. I'm not to the point of like, and just my system doesn't function this way to where we front in ways that people know who we are. We introduce ourselves with different names, but coming as a system to terms with like, we're gonna decide to take this as our system name and use it in the world publicly, I think was a huge shift and took a lot of collaboration and agreement to move to that point. And then when we hear people call us that, it confirms our plurality to us, and when we introduce ourselves, and we also find ourselves sometimes not using it and introducing ourselves as Crystal, or particularly if like we leave a message for somebody who knew us before we changed our name, and that's just information for us about where we're at or what we're doing with that. So I'm really grateful to have become more part of the community, and also have created community in ways. I created like groups that have like lasted over time, and it's been really meaningful. Thank you for the question.
We have to agree. This is Melissa's. We came into like the first chunk of our self-system acceptance kind of spontaneously and maybe in an unusual way. But I think what kind of was more integrative and what kind of caught more traction was getting to know more plural folks, coming into relationships with people like us, systems like us too. And also, I think just we have this like intrinsic defiance against things that we're told that just don't stick. And I think in a weird way, maybe some of the really bad therapy we've had really kind of helped us, because we were kind of looking at these things that these people were telling us about ourselves and going, now we keep trying this on, we keep trying to make it fit, and it just doesn't. And so if this doesn't fit, then maybe it's reasonable to think that this other stuff fits, that these other people we're talking to and these things that we're hearing, and yes, on YouTube, on TikTok, on all of the social media, going, wow, this seems to be a phenomenon. This is a thing. This isn't just us being in denial or showing a lack of insight or being resistant. This is just us not being willing or able to accept these things that just aren't true.
Hey, this is Jamie. When we got our diagnosis in 2004, our world made sense. It was probably the most strong validation we had that who we are is who we are for a reason. But then what followed was a lot of professional years of, you better keep this zipped up, because if you talk about it too publicly, you're going to lose your credibility, et cetera, et cetera. And I know I've shared this in other work of mine before, but I gradually dipped my toe in the water of coming out in certain contexts where I felt safe. I used the word dissociation to discuss my CPTSD in my first book. And then I just noticed how much better I felt with every level of being more authentic about ourselves and who we are. And I have met tremendous friends, including many of you, I think all of you on this screen, as a result of being out and saying we too. And because yeah, it's been a lonely, isolating journey for a lot of my career, because I kind of had this whoop 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 of like, yeah, this makes sense. And surely there has to be other people like us. Because when we were in graduate school, reading Kay Redfield Jamison's An Unquiet Mind about her journey with bipolar disorder was formational to us. And then we saw just how much this kind of got shut down, our dissociative mind. And then when we went to our first conference of the major establishment organization on the study of dissociation, it was like, whoa, we're not safe at all to be out here. So maybe this is like groundbreaking advocacy to just be out in the field. And so I just want to say that to all of you on the screen who are out, to all of you who are listening who are out. I never want to force people out of closets, because I know there's a lot of safety things that you have to consider for yourself and your system. But I have learned this about my queer identity as well, that just being yourself in a world that doesn't get you is advocacy in and of itself. And the more we've really embraced that and stepped into that, the better we have felt. Because guess what? There's healing power in being authentic, at least for systems like us. Thanks for the question, Katie.
This is Katie. I remember stumbling on DID and having it make so much sense when I was in my early 20s, and then trying to talk about it with my therapist, who I thought would be really excited that I had figured out something about myself, and that was surprised when they were really not happy at all that I had brought this and thought maybe I was being histrionic or showy or wanted to be special. And instead of just like, no, this fits because this, I've been trying to figure out what it is. But that didn't, that helped to create more shame, obviously. And being so involved with the establishment and hearing how people talked behind closed doors about people with DID who are leaders in the field was so disheartening and scary. That was partially what made me in some ways want to come out. But I remember at one conference where I was on the board of ISSTD, and during that conference I was reading Dr. Nikki Walker's Neuroqueer book. I don't know how many people have read it, and how profoundly, along with the plural therapists I was sort of working with at that time, who were challenging my shame about plurality and should I be out, and would I even have worth if I were out, or openly acknowledged it. That book was so validating in my difference, because I kept being invited in different spaces, because I guess people think like what I have to say, or think I'm smart, or I don't know. But then I'm different, and I can't hide that no matter how much, and I end up getting metaphorically punched in the face. And that's been a painful thing over and over again. So reading this thing while I'm kind of at this weird stodgy conference where I'm hearing all these microaggressions I'm constantly dodging or figuring out, should I respond to or should I not respond to? I'm going to out myself, and what does it mean if I out myself? Was so affirming of my weirdness, my not being able to be in spaces that and conform, and I just can't. And I remember this one quote that I just really love, that hit to the heart of things, and it's about autism, but I think it's about kind of all of us. It says, if you reject the fundamental premise of the pathology paradigm and accept the premise of the neurodiversity paradigm, and it turns out that you don't have, then it turns out that you don't have a disorder at all. And it turns out that maybe you function exactly as you ought to function, and that you live in a society that isn't sufficiently enlightened to effectively integrate people who function like you. And that maybe the troubles in your life have not been the result of any inherent wrongness in you, and that maybe everything you've heard about autism is open to question, and that your true potential is unknown and is yours to explore, and that maybe you are, in fact, a thing of beauty. And that, I'll just leave it there.
Michelle, I'm so grateful for this group, first and foremost. My heart is so here. You know, I guess I identify with my acceptance. It's an evolving acceptance. That's something that's taken place. And looking back now, I see it's taken place over decades. When I was a young undergrad student in the early 90s, late 80s, the work of, my mentors, Robert Ackerman, in inner child work, ACOA stuff, I so identified with all of that. And it hit me. It hit me in my heart at the core of who I was. And I kind of stayed with that for a while. And then attending Jamie's dancing mindfulness retreats, noticing that I could just kind of be myself, and allowing that whoever was there was able to come out and be accepted and loved for who she was. And then the cool thing is, Jamie, I've never shared this with you, but being interviewed for your book, being one of the 61, that day that I left after talking with you, after being interviewed, I had all of this stuff going on, all these conversations, and I had my daughter text Jamie and saying, well, don't forget to tell her this, and don't forget to tell her this, and what about this, and what about, must have texted her like 6 or 7, 8 times. All of that together, and then attending the Healing Together conference, and just knowing, just knowing in my soul that, okay, this is it, this is what this is, because I was accepted. We all were accepted for who we were, was so freaking incredible. Probably one of the most powerful experiences of our whole life. And I equate that metaphorically to how I look at dragonflies. For many, many years in my life, I was afraid of dragonflies because my mom always taught me that, they bite, they'll sting you. And so I was misinformed until I was curious, until I did my own research. And it's a good thing that I did, because in some ways I feel sad for all the years that I missed out on understanding what dragonflies were and what they could do and all their neat little capabilities and stuff. And having a pond right outside out my door right now, I'm so glad I did the research on dragonflies, because first of all, I'm no longer afraid of them. And because I've removed that lens that I used to see them from my whatever, my things that I bring forth, I'm now able to see their beauty. And with that, because I've done my own research on trying to understand who I am as a person and who I am as a system, I can now look at myself and go, you know what? I'm okay. Like I'm kind of like in a mosaic, each little piece is purposely put there for a reason. And when I stand back and look at the whole picture, it's not so bad. It's actually kind of cool.
Thank you, Michelle, for that. There's something about what you said that made me think about the lens. I just in the last few years, looking at how I experience the world, even though I'm referred to as Melissa or it's I experience the world as a we, and just coming back to lived experience professionals, how important we are. That lens is so important because it's innate to ask. I think there was somebody, another colleague who said, I welcome all of the yous that you've ever been. We're curious about all of the varied perspectives that you experience at once. So yeah, I feel like we have a lot of value, and hopefully people will listen and catch up and be curious and learn.
I was just going to circle around to the system acceptance. I think it's an ever evolving, ongoing journey. I always think I'm there, and then I'm like, oh, maybe I'm not quite there. So I think it's one of those things that really vacillates. But I think what helps is becoming connected to community. And when I reflect back on how that started with one of my parts registering for an infinite mind, and then hearing Jamie, speak about her experience with dissociation as a therapist, I was like, oh my God, other people are talking about this. This doesn't have to be like this thing that I'm supposed to keep hidden and not talk about. And I think it's been a process that's unfolded. And I think even in my life now, I'm more connected with multiples than I am with singletons. Like my relationships have just changed so much based on my different parts and where I feel safest. But I'm really grateful for this community and this chat and my mentorship program. I mean, I learned from them too. It doesn't feel like a hierarchy in there. And just the more and more time I spend and talk with other multiples, like, again, it's also breaking down whatever internalized stigma I had from even being in the field, right? Because I feel like for those of us that work in the field, we've had the stigma from what we heard when we were younger, just on the media and the Hollywood, then the stuff, at school and academia. I mean, it's just so many, and then the clinical training. Like by the time you discover your system, you're like, wait a second. Why aren't X, Y, and Z true about me based on all this stuff? Like, it's just a mess. And so I think community is what's really led to my system acceptance. And I wish I could say that I felt more connected in other communities, but I just don't yet. Like I thought I had glimpses of it, and then when it came down to my plurality or multiplicity, I definitely was then definitely identified as different, but not accepted. And it wasn't anything overt, and you can just feel it, right? It doesn't even have to be anything somebody says, it's just the energy in the room. So I think, communities like this and other ones that are developing that I see with other people from our community are really incredible because these spaces are needed. And I'm just thinking about the power of this conversation today. And wouldn't it be lovely if we could have those three entities all have a really healthy dialogue? Like we're all having a healthy dialogue together as friends, colleagues, right? About hard topics that impact our community, to which some of us all have our unique ways of thinking and speaking about it with our own languages, but we're able to have that. But if we were to think about what we were told about our condition and how we might show up today, those two things are going to look vastly different, right? Yeah, so I'm just kind of like, again, my mind is blown, and thank you for inviting us to be part of the panel.
We actually answered a fair amount of the questions we had listed with our overall conversation, so I'm not going to bring those in. I don't know if there's anything that anybody wants to finish with to make sure we touch on in the time that we have left. I will just leave that open for folks. And this was Katie talking.
This is Melissa's. We just want to say thank you to everybody here, everybody watching, everybody in our communities. And this is what gives us hope, is looking around and seeing all of y'all and just knowing that, every time it seems like we click onto social media or mail or anything, there's somebody we know or somebody we don't know yet who's doing some absolutely wonderful stuff. And it's just so encouraging. We remember, 2019, we came out and it was this whole thing, but we were frantically, of course, Googling, like, therapist with DID. Can you be a therapist with DID in public? I think was like a Google keyword search. And that's how we found Jamie and saw, oh my gosh, there's somebody who not only is doing it, but lived to tell and seems like they're doing pretty okay. And that was like, okay, we can do this. We're going to do this thing. So a lot of gratitude to everybody who's gone before us and who's going to come up with us and after us too. Thank you all.
Thank you. This is Jamie. Melissa's your quote in Dissociation Made Simple, I think says it all. You have a lot of great quotes in there, but the one we constantly cite you with is, our stories have been told by people who know nothing about us. And sitting in those conferences over the years, because the thing about bridging, like I hear a lot about building bridges, and it was even referenced today. Bridging's a two-way street. I think a lot of us have extended those olive branches, but people have to be willing to meet us halfway on the bridge. And I don't see a lot of that. I mean, there's hope. I see glimpses of hope happening with it, and it's beautiful. But this is how we do it: is we tell our stories, and it takes a lot of courage and vulnerability to do it. And we often get, the compliment and the praise, like, thank you for your vulnerability. And I say, I live for the day when that's not such a unique thing, when it's just how we interact as humans. And just to see so many faces on the screen and know how many faces are going to be interacting with the conference, this is the revolution, my friends. And keep being yourselves. We love you all.
I just want to share how important it is to be vulnerable, and how scary it is for us to be a speaker. We're not really, speakers, but it's so important to share the imperfections to others, how perfectly imperfect we are. I think that's one of the main reasons why we're here, because we're constantly feeling like an imposter and just, constantly, have a lot of stuff going on, and yet, yet we're doing the work. We're proud of a lot of things, and just wanted to make sure that the community sees, I'm sure that the community sees themselves in us.
Yeah, I really appreciate each of you and the opportunity and the conference and the peoples and systems that it's going to reach. The field has so much othering in us and so much us versus them. And I feel like professionals who have lived experience are in such a unique position to empower the straddling of that divide and the coming together of things and the realization that, like, we're all humans in this together and we all need each other and that none of us will make it alone.
This is Michelle. Listening to everybody, again, I'm so grateful to this group. And I'm going to get real with y'all. So I'm going to I'm going to feel somewhat smart glasses off. So I'm just going to be just going to be me. The phrase unapologetically authentic. Been working that for like the last year and a half, almost 2 years. And in that, it can be really scary. It can be scary. And some people out there might be thinking, I could never do that. But like what I say with my clients when I'm meeting with them, they are the most courageous warriors that I know. And knowing what brings them into my office, I'm a part of that bunch too. So it's okay. It's about letting go of the shame and the guilt and allowing yourself, to be vulnerable. It's going to be a little scary. And yet, you can do it because you got this far. And there's even more beautiful things and more wonderful things are going to happen as a result, because I know where my life is at now, things that I've been helping clients with and the things I've been doing in my office and even in my own healing has been incredible. Things that I never thought that would ever happen have been happening in the last year. So I guess as a leaving note is just to allow yourself to be unapologetically authentic, because you are a warrior on the inside and you can do it.
Thanks everyone for participating. Let's try that again. Thanks everyone for participating. It's why I love to have conversations like this with different folks who are doing the work in mental health with lived experience, because everybody always brings such amazing insight with their different selves, and I love seeing the things bounce off of each other. And I am hoping this is useful for folks watching the conference, and maybe even folks from the establishment who are singlets who, if they maybe get a little few ideas about adjusting their model or including lived experience voices in their research on the research team or on the clinical team, and why that's important and why it should be valued. I appreciate each and every one of all of yous.
Thank you, Katie. Thank you for moderating. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Love you all.
Likewise.
Thanks, y'all.
Bye.
Bye.